Welcome everyone at the second season of our impact on the environment of film production. Yes, so I'm happy to welcome you in this new season, and our main speaker will be Bjorn, so the leader of our project, and today meeting is dedicated to streaming. Yes.
Yeah, welcome.
Okay.
So, welcome everybody. And before we start with the topic and the guest of today, I will give a short introduction into what the GEM Green Education in Media project is. Those who joined us last semester might already know about that, so I will try to keep it brief, but at least one time per series, so to say, I will give this short reminder what the frame of this presentation is. So I will share my screen for a quick introduction. So we actually started last year with the Erasmus project, Erasmus Partnership Green Education in Media, with a couple of universities, which are the Film University in Babelsberg, the Jagiellonian University in Krakow in Poland, and the Film School, Łódź Film School in Poland. In Tampere, we have the Tampere University and the Tampere University of Applied Sciences. Then we have the University of Zagreb, Malta University, University of Athens as partners, and the Institute for Art and Innovation. Did I forget anyone, just to be sure? Okay, Sophie says I didn't. So it's quite a large Erasmus partnership, and what unites us is the search of how can we get the environment, nature, and the nature back into the classroom, because we're keeping dwelling in those digital worlds and creating those digital platforms and services to create fictional worlds in TV series and so on. And we ask ourselves, why do we keep envisioning, well, something like this, if we'd rather live in a future that is more sustainable, embraces nature instead of replaces it? And one answer might be because we teach like this in concrete buildings from the year 2000, I wanted to say like the 60s, but this is actually a rather new building, which still is like concrete, steel, and glass. And only because we work with computers, why can't we learn like this? We actually did learn like this. Last summer, we had a 1-week workshop with partners from all over Europe, from all those mentioned universities, where we had a workshop on green storytelling for sustainability, right in the middle of nowhere in Brandenburg. And it was really nice. Still, there was a little bit more technology than just like that, but the mood, I think the mood is like it was there. So that is what drives us. So why are we so far from nature? Just because we do these digital things. And how can we reconcile it again? Well, actually, what I've just said is here elaborated, not in a nutshell, but rather rather verbose. So I skipped that slide for the sake of saving time, and give a short overview in the particular topics that we have. So we are looking into alternative media learning spaces. So that's what I just showed. So is it possible to teach technology subjects, media technology, film production, interactive media in nature, in natural settings, and in other settings than just concrete buildings? Then we have the topic of environmental impact of media design and production. That's where we are right now. We're asking the question, our craft of media and film production, how does our production process and our craft and domain as such contribute to, climate change and pollution and CO2? and how can we contribute to produce more sustainable and more responsible. And then we have the topic in the work package 4, stories of environmental impact and climate change. That is the question where we look outside into other domains and sectors and see what can we as storytellers contribute with our craft to, well, basically make a better planet, make the world we live in better. And in the last work package, the sentence hasn't even been finished, which is a running gag for a year now, but I think I'll never finish it. We finish it at the end. The question, how can we put all this together to make better and more near nature affine curricula in our media studies and break the concrete wall towards the outside, the nature that is there. We just have to go there and find ways to embrace it. Yeah, going back to, so as I said, environmentally, or well, just some short examples. So one thing we did a lot is themed nature walks, where we went outside and had discussions and inspirational sessions, not around a table, but in the open, while walking, while getting inspiration from nature. We tried different tools also where we could digitally collect artifacts from nature to put it into the digital space. And we are also looking for ways to kind of get back from the digital space into the analog space. And another example was a world building workshop with Juan Diaz and Alex McDowell back in last December, which is world building is a storytelling technique, which also helps to envision more coherent, more sustainable ecosystems. Well, these are the participating universities again. And this is the last slide, which tells us this has been generously and is still generously funded by the European Union in the Erasmus Plus program. As I said, we're now in the theme of the part of the project which deals with a, well, impact on sustainability, with the carbon imprint and the general sustainability of media production. And I myself, I also have a background. So now I'm professor of media production, but film and media production. But I have a background in media technology and have been dealing also a lot with the distribution side. And actually, after we finish producing our content, there's a lot of happening. We are putting in place a large distribution machine, a huge machinery, a huge system, which has a lot of, creates a lot of CO2. This has a large carbon footprint. And on the other hand, we haven't even really started looking into where exactly there's potential for more sustainable solution, where we can save CO2, what really is the impact at which part of this chain. And this is why I invited today's guest, Annette Wilson from RBB, the Rundfunk Berlin-Brandenburg, the public broadcaster of the German region of Berlin and Brandenburg, part of the ARD network. And she was to be joined by a researcher, by Ahmed from Fraunhofer Focus, who is responsible for the technical part of the project that she will be introducing. He unfortunately cannot be here today because of a health condition, as he just had to notify us. And so we have to excuse him. And if you have very deep technical questions, you can ask them and we can tell you later. So unfortunately, he cannot be here today, but Annette is here, and I'm very happy because I've been working with Annette for quite a while, for a long time, when I was still at RBB in European Union funded research projects. And it's very interesting and exciting to see that a broadcaster sees this responsibility also for not only the content that is created, but also how the content is created and what impact all this has. So Annette, welcome. You're head of the RBB Innovation Project Group, if that is still the correct term. So
yeah, that's still more or less correct.
Yeah, okay.
Thank you for inviting me.
So if you like, you could simply start, and then after your presentation, we'll get into a conversation. I will ask some polite questions first, and then you can come in with the more direct, straightforward questions that you always wanted to ask to somebody from RBB, if you ever wanted that. Today you should want. Okay.
Okay. So I'll just share my screen, Björn, if that's okay.
Yes. Yeah. I'm unshared at the same time. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. So you can hear me and you can see my screen.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, thank you for the opportunity to talk about the impact of media distribution today. In particular, so we're going to look at streaming, which I must admit is something I didn't realize that it had such an environmental impact until last year, when we start looking at some figures, and it's quite shocking, actually. So first of all, what is streaming? What are we talking about when we're talking about streaming? We're talking about the transmission of audio and video data via the public internet. It's the transmission of OTT, so over-the-top content, from and through multiple IT infrastructures, data centers, and wide area and telecommunication networks. So you can, from that bullet point, you begin to get a feeling of how complex the whole streaming issue is. Streaming also covers video processing and encoding of the videos, for example, real-time encoding for live streams. And it also covers then finally the display of the media content on the end user, on the end device used. So streaming covers quite a lot. It's, if you think about it first, you think possibly you just have a file that goes from A to B, but there's, from getting that file to A to B, there's there are a lot of complex technical steps involved. As Björn said, unfortunately, Ahmed isn't here, so he could have told you more about those complex technical steps. I'll just kind of breeze over them. So how does streaming affect CO2 emissions? Well, all these components we've been talking about involved in the production, the technical distribution, and displaying the content that on the end devices, they all consume electricity, quite a lot of electricity. At the same time, there's a growing use of streaming services, so Netflix, Disney Plus, for example, especially during lockdown, during the pandemic. I'm sure you're aware there was a big shift towards streaming. There was a large rise in the amount of content being streamed. And there have been various studies done on the impact of modern media use on the global climate, trying to find equivalent CO2 emissions related to 1 hour of streaming. And it's not too easy. So here I'll just go through some general figures. So in 2019, 75% of all internet traffic was video streaming. And if you look on the right, so you see Netflix is responsible for 15%, that was in 2022, of global internet traffic, followed closely by YouTube with nearly 12%. You can also see there on the bottom, Disney, TikTok, Facebook, and Prime. So that's a huge amount of internet traffic is just about streaming. The prediction for 2022 that mobile traffic would be, and mobile traffic 79% would be video streaming. What we're also observing, especially in Germany, is the growth of so-called OTT only households. It's households that don't use broadcast. So where when these households consume video content or audio, it's all streamed. The energy consumption for 1 hour of video streaming is approximately 0.3 kilowatts. That's one of the the figures that gets thrown around. And another study came up with the figure that 1 hour of Netflix streaming is the equivalent to driving 400 meters. So just from the last figures I've mentioned, you could probably guess there's been various studies done, and the results vary greatly. If you look at the table on the right-hand side, this is one that RTL Plus released. They conducted a study on the effects of streaming, and the values there range from 32 to over 3,000. So it's that's just there to give you an idea of the range of figures that you come up with, and it all very much depends on the approach and the methodology used, and this varies greatly. One of the problems is there's no standardized definition of the entire streaming value chain, and it's quite difficult then to measure the system, the energy used by all the individual system components and the networks. So the common approaches used are approximating the proportionate power consumption of the network used with the help of average values per data volume, or the power per user model, which allocates the basic power of the systems to a user based on the volume of data used by that particular user. So various approaches, none of them standardized. So we're still kind of in the dark a bit. So what's the industry doing? Well, there's been, with the increased amount of streaming going on, there's definitely a growing awareness. We've been able to observe this over the last few years. Various initiatives have started, but one to definitely keep an eye on is Greening of Streaming. If you don't know, Greening of Streaming is an organization created to address the growing concerns about energy impact of the streaming sector. So really also trying to look at the whole big picture. Lots of industry involved. So Fraunhofer Focus, who are the coordinator of the Green Streaming Project that I'll come to in a minute, have also joined the Greening of Streaming initiative. The EBU, the European Broadcasting Union, is a member, and various large concerns. And one of the approaches they're looking at in greening streaming is what they call good enough. So what's good enough? Does it always have to be the highest resolution video that you watch on your end devices? For example, if you're talking about, I don't know, a television that's in your kitchen, in the corner of your kitchen, and it's just basically on as more or less as background noise, you really need to have like high definition video playing on this type of television, because one of the main culprits when it comes to using large amounts of electricity are the end devices, especially the televisions. Okay, so against this background, we were lucky enough to submit an idea for a German research project last year and get funding. So the project is called Green Streaming, and it started in May this year and will run until April 2026. And that's been funded by the German Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action. I think the funding altogether is just around 4.5 million mark, and we've got 6 partners in the project. So what's the objective of the project? So the objective is the development, testing, and application of a measurable and accessible sustainable digital media value chain that enables the seamless, holistic, and demonstrably green provision of streaming content. So if you look at the graphic here, you say there's lots of, along the whole streaming chain, there are lots of challenges but opportunities. So when it comes to video encoding, when it comes to the transmission, and when it comes to the playback, and these can all, if we tweak all of these, we can help reduce the overall energy consumption. That at least is the thesis we're working on. So the challenge, I suppose, or the problem is the total energy consumption is mainly influenced by distribution, storage, and use on end devices. And the technical complexity of video content depends on the type of content. So if you have, for example, an action movie, the actual content is more complex than, say, if you have maybe an animation, or you had a simple news program where you just have a talking head. There's not that content isn't as complex as other content. And this is where encoding comes in. It's unfortunate that Ahmed isn't here, because he would have been able to tell us more about the types of encoding that are possible. You also have to consider the quality of service, but also the subjective perception of the content, so the quality of experience and energy efficiency. So you're trying to bring these three aspects together, which isn't too easy. And we're also looking at the establishment of suitable measurement methods and recognized approaches to impact the chain analysis. And finally, the amount of data used correlates only slightly with the energy consumption of the system components of the transmitting infrastructure, because if you've got a server, even if you're not transmitting, the server's still on, the server room's still running. So it's not always a one-to-one correlation of how much data is being used and the energy consumption. So the approach we're following in the Green Streaming project is we're starting off by we want to analyze all the components along the streaming value chain in terms of energy efficiency. So we're looking at the audio video encoders, we're looking at packaging, we're looking at the content delivery networks, and we're looking at the players and end devices. So that's what we're doing at the moment. In fact, RBB, this is the work package that we're leading. And it's quite a challenge. It's actually more of a challenge than I would have thought, just due to the complexity of the issue. But we're nearly there, which is good. And once we have this, we've basically described, as we call the streaming chain, and we've identified all the components. Then the next step is to go on to measurement. So identifying the points where you can measure, where can you physically measure the use of the consumption of electricity, definition of the variables, collection of component-specific measurement data, and use this for the optimization of the chain with the aid of real-time data from processing and playback processing. To help us with all this, we're using machine learning and AI models. And one of the results of the projects will be a green digital twin of the streaming supply chain. That would help us with future decision making. And we hope then that the result of the project will be a measurable, accessible streaming value chain that enables sustainable operation and sustainable use of streaming content. So the expected project results are, we hope to have a CO2 balancing for streaming. We hope to have analysis and measurement tools. So really as I said, by looking at all the components, for each component, trying to figure out which is the best way to analyze it and measure it. We are looking at AI media workflows for hybrid production and stream analytics. So when I say production, we're talking about production of the signal, not green production, which is a different thing altogether. We're looking at AI-supported contextualized video encoding. So this is what Fraunhofer Focus are doing. So really looking at how you can, depending on the type of content and the type of video, how you can really encode it best, and how AI can support that process. We will hope to have the green digital twin of the streaming supply chain. So this is something that we'll be able to use to help us in decision making, to help simulate. So if we change one thing here, what will happen further down the stream. What we're also going to do is we want to test a green streaming mode for consumer devices. So we'll test that in terms of acceptance, in terms of usability. The idea would be for example, on HBB TV, that consumers can actually actively say, I want to watch the the green stream. So that might be, it might be that the quality, or it's not as high definition, the quality is different. It might be that it somehow reduces the brightness of the screen being used. We still have to, we're only starting to talk about the possibilities here. But the idea is to empower viewers to make a choice. So a further result will be the criteria for sustainability assessment. And at the end of the project, we also hope to have a CO2 calculator for video streaming. So unfortunately, I only had this diagram in German, but I'll talk you through it. So it's the green streaming, so the project architecture. So if you look at the left-hand side, we've got the production, because it shows the, I suppose, the architecture, but also the role the partners involved play. So we're looking at production, we're looking at hybrid production, cloud versus on-premises solutions. So when it comes to signaling, then we'll be going on to look at encoding and packaging. This is where Fraunhofer come in with content-aware encoding, using the AI models developed by the company DeepEA. Then we look at distribution, so how the different distribution networks, and then the computing power needed for these, and the general, to save the data. So this is really good that we have Telecom as a partner in the project. So because these are measurements that RBB, for example, could never make, because we work with service providers such as Telecom. And then when it comes to, on the right hand side, we have then the end user, so the viewer. So looking at playback and usage, so we'll be using stream analytics from Fraunhofer, and we'll also be looking at developing, as I said, the green streaming player together with Telecom and Fraunhofer. And at the end, we hope that at the top, we're saying we want to have this green digital twin of the whole value chain, and we'd also want to have a CO2 calculator. This is where Klimaaktiv, this is an agency that works on climate issues, will be helping us. And a further issue we're looking at is if we can come up with a certified green streaming label. I'm not sure if we manage it, but we'll try our best. And then on the right-hand side, you see we've also got a few association partners, RTL, Zattoo, Arte, Bitmoving. So we're quite, as a consortium, we're quite open. And the interest of these other partners reflects, as I said, there is a lot of awareness in the industry about the issue. And I know Robert, who coordinates the project, said he was at the IBC and reckons become known as, oh yeah, you're the German green streaming project. So I think there's a lot going on at the moment, and I hope we can contribute to the whole issue with some really helpful results. Okay, so that's kind of going from the global view to what we're doing in the projects. But you could ask, why is green streaming important for RBB? As Björn described, RBB were the regional broadcaster for Berlin and Brandenburg. In fact, when I'm in the office, I'm just around the corner from Björn and the Film University. We're on the same street, and we're, I suppose, a small broadcaster, but we're also part of the ARD. So if you look on the right-hand side, you've got the map of Germany. The ARD is the network of all the public service broadcasters in Germany. So I looked at some streaming TV viewing and streaming figures for 2022, and for television overall in Germany, 251.8 million hours of TV content is viewed daily, and that includes 6.8 million hours of streaming daily. if you then just go to so that's all TV content in Germany. If you look at the ARD channel, so total daily consumption is 80 million hours, which includes 2.9 million hours of streaming. So that's kind of a mind-boggling amount of hours of streaming when you think about it. So we decided at RBB we want to become more sustainable. We're doing it we do green production. We're now looking at green streaming and see how this can all be used to reducing our CO2 emissions. So we intend to use the project results and findings to make program distribution strategies and processes more sustainable. But I mentioned the ARD before, and that's important because we don't operate in a vacuum. So the RBB wants to establish new technologies within the ARD because all the time we're moving towards shared infrastructures, and we're involved in all the important working groups there, where there's also a lot of interest in the topic. We'll describe the streaming value chain in detail, analyze its individual components and processes, and basically based on this, develop a best practice workflow for sustainable media distribution. And as I mentioned, we want to implement the green streaming mode as a prototype in our HbbTV and web-based video players, which we will then test for usability and acceptance. And what we'd also like to do is analyze and compare the CO2 footprint of the different distribution channels. Because as you know, there's not just streaming, we still also have, for example, broadcast. So looking and seeing if there is any comparison and if that maybe is interesting for future programming distribution. So that was it.
Yeah, thank you very much, Annette. And I wanted to give you a hand. And what I find remarkable here is that I see a reoccurring pattern. So in the early days of streaming, so there was also a lot of talking about adaptive encoding and making actually with the aim of being able to transmit a stream at all. So that we have a very small capacity in early smartphone networks, and we try to bring across to transmit at least a bearable stream. Now we're way beyond that. We have glass fiber networks. People have 50 megabit connections at home and so on. And what we're doing is we're not trying to see, okay, this is now what we need, and we don't take more, but we take all we can get. So we stream like 4K videos to HD TVs, and just having data, transmitting data that we actually don't use. We don't see the advantage. And it's like, but I asked myself, so now what is the first? Is there anything we can do right now as consumers? And would there be anything right now where you say, well, you can do this even without developing all this, and it will help to increase the carbon footprint of your media consumption, apart from not watching TV, but
decrease.
Yeah.
Turn down the brightness of your television.
That's a very practical tip. Yeah.
It was interesting because it was one of the discussions we had when we were talking about the project, because we were saying it's quite political, because for years we've been saying bigger, better, brighter, so more high definition, and actually what you need to be saying now is the good enough approach. So you actually don't need your television. You don't need such a big television. You don't need it so bright, and you definitely don't need it in such high resolution all the time, depending on maybe on the content, on the usage situation. So, try and be a bit more smart about how you watch it, and and maybe sometimes broadcast is the solution.
And with brightness, the interesting thing is that actually you perceive it in contrast. So it's like well, like using less salt. You initially you might tell it, but if you get used to it, soon you will notice barely a difference. At least that's my experience. I think also in already there are clients, streaming clients, where you can choose whether you want a high quality or a lower quality stream. Although I really like the approach of the green streaming option, because it's another choice you take. If you choose to be more responsible and sustainable, you're probably more likely to take that choice than to take the choice of a lower quality. So if you ask the question, do I want a lower quality or a higher quality? You say, well, I want the higher quality. But if you ask the question, do you want a high or low impact on the environment? You might opt for low. So
yeah.
So how will you implement that, by the way? Maybe how will that look like for the user?
We don't know yet because we haven't started. So I think I'm not sure where we'll do it. Do you do it in the settings, or do you do it as a, kind of underneath when you open the media takes or your video library? Do you say, like you choose maybe subtitles? Do you have a button that says, give me this in green, I want the green version of this stream? Possibly.
Yeah, there might be also the question whether you actually find it in so if you go to settings and then the sub point stream and then sub item stream and then you have a sub item and so on. So, or maybe it could also be, well, ideally it would be mandatory, so that if you turn it on for the first time, so do you want the sustainable stream, yes or not? So as I said, I really like, because it takes an option that is actually already there in a way, because you can choose lower quality, into a more positive question, which turns around the obvious answer. Yes, I want high. No, I want low impact.
And it probably makes more sense not to have it in the settings now that we're talking about it, because as you said, it will be hidden somewhere within in a submenu, where if you actually have kind of, a big green button under each video, you can feel good every time you press it.
Well, once more about this, we wanting more if there's the room for more. I think this also translates well into the world of production and post-production. So often if we render pictures, if we use cloud editing or so in the former days there had been the option, we still do offline editing, but in the 90s it was what you did where if you wanted to edit a video on the computer, you would have a very low quality offline edit, and then it would take a long time to render the online edit with a full resolution. And but in many cases it's really, you can do the edit you can edit a 4K video with an HD or even SD stream to do the rough cut. You could do that, but just because it's possible and it feels like a bit more comfortable, we go for the option maximum quality, unless your network says, well, I can't handle that. Only then we would turn down, as well with, for example, rendering capacity. By the way, if anybody has a question, please put it in the chat. Maybe what could be interesting is if I don't know whether everybody's familiar with actually how streaming distribution works. So maybe in a nutshell, because you mentioned the content delivery networks, the CDNs. So actually, it's not like one point. There's not a server at Reed Hastings' home which handles all streams that go out to all Netflix users worldwide. But there's a wide network, a content delivery network, which consists of hundreds, maybe thousands of intermediate nodes which distribute streams. So it's like a tree structure. So you have one stream feed to maybe the broadcaster, so from RBB to Telecom, and they then distribute. They recode the stream and send it to all their delivery nodes, so that and from these delivery nodes, it comes to your home, basically. So it's really like a multiplying structure. It multiplies in effort. So anything you save, for example, in the encoding of a stream, will also have a multiplying and a how you call it, potence factor. Well, it will the effect will also multiply.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's why it's, as I said, sorry, that's why I said it was, for us, it's really good that we have telecom in the project, because obviously we're not a content distribution network provider, so we'd typically use somebody that provides this, the big players, or Amazon Web Services, or Akamai, and we've got telecom in the project, so we can actually gain a lot more insights into that whole kind of CDN power consumption.
We have a question by Wojtek, please.
It was amazing presentation, Annette, and it's really like enlightening and great to see this from broadcaster point of view. And I remember that we talked a lot about this during Berlinale Talents workshops 2 years ago, during online Berlinale edition. But after long consideration, one of recommendations of kind of young filmmakers community, they were actually two, like we should try to come back to shooting in 2K, which was very brave, and most people were like, it was a huge decision for them to not go for 4K shooting. But about the distribution, we thought that it could be very interesting to maybe try to advocate for the European Union regulations for especially TV screens or TV sets producers to much more develop upscaling on the end of TV sets. But actually, this what we are screening should be the lowest bandwidth. Maybe hypothetically it could be HD, but if you have 4K TV, your TV should upscale this to 4K if you really want to have it like this. So it was, how I remember, it was two main propositions from community that we as a filmmakers should consider shooting again in just 2K, but from the end making post-production in 2K, but the presentation for viewers should be more on the hardware level of the TV screen, and all AI and all development of technology should be forced on the producers of TV screens. It was general two propositions. I still think they make sense, but they open, we stopped it after the Berlinale Talents. It opened huge question, what actually viewer will see in documentary film if TV screen will upscale this to 4K, because it will not be visible like faces in the far background of the crowd when you have, for example, shootings, which you also have sometimes mobile phone shootings in documentary film, and you upscale this for your film, but still it's not reality. It's something which algorithms are creating, like faces of the people in the crowd. And if you put low quality or low resolution documentary film in the even now existing modern TV set, and you will choose upscaling to 4K, it will give you these faces, but this is AI approximation of faces. It's not really documentary. So it was many interesting subjects during this Berlinale. Thank you.
There are two interesting aspects in it, but first maybe Annette, if you have an immediate answer to this.
I think it sounds very interesting. As I said, I think the TV manufacturers obviously want to show, bigger, better, shinier TVs, and that possibly needs to be questioned. I think what would be really interesting is maybe to look at that approach and compare it to the encoding, because at the same time we still want to enjoy content. So, it's just kind of, I think, let's not kind of put everything back to 2K. But maybe there are situations, and try and work out the scenarios when that makes sense, and how you can use the technology like the encoding to really then reduce bandwidth, so that you have, so you're only using what you need to use.
So one interesting aspect of this is also the question, where do you put the processing power? And this is also one reason why it's so important to find out where actually the energy is consumed. For example, so of course, so if you do video encoding, you can do this. There are symmetric encoding algorithms, which mean the encoding is as fast is as complex as the decoding, or you can have algorithms where the encoding is quite complex, takes a long time, and the decoding is very, very simple and fast. And this is mostly the approach. So if you have, for example, use Adobe Premiere, Final Cut, or Avid or so, and you press the encode button, then you see that it can take a long time if you do a high quality encode. Still, it decodes in real time on the smallest device. But for example, for a provider, like for a telecom service, of course, they could say, well, if we put more load on the end user devices and have less complex encoding, maybe we can save some energy in our data centers. So while there would be more energy consumed by the end user devices. So I don't know how this balance would be. So, but this has really to be found out, because here we would have a decision, a trade-off. So for the company, it's cheaper to have the end user devices do all the work, and for the end users, or for the environment, it would be maybe more efficient if the data centers do more work. But as said, this is not decided. As for the upscaling, there we come into the artificial intelligence debate, I would say, which is a bit too far for today's session, or too far off from today's session. But I can say that, to my experience, TV manufacturers tended to use the lowest quality processor that still does the job, the weakest processor that still does the job for the TV. So if you want to have an AI-enabled processor in your TV, then the TV would also get a lot more expensive, and the TV market is highly competitive, so that might be, well, an issue. So usually they build on very, very low key hardware, unless you buy something very fancy. So like a TV that Apple would build, but they don't build TVs, but just the streaming box. Well, which would maybe be able, but still in the Apple TV box, you have a comparatively weak processor. But this just as a side topic, maybe.
But you mentioned something important there,
Yep.
Björn, and that's what I think we're trying to address, is this, if the telecom says, okay, well, we do less, we do the kind of the decoding happens in the TV, and then we, as a telecom company, we look like we've got a lower carbon footprint, and that's why we're trying to look at the whole stream. And have this, my hopes anyway for this digital twin is that we can then, you can do that type of kind of maths, if you like, that you do the modeling and say, okay, so if we did less here and more here, where do you end up at the end of the day? I mean, is it really more efficient?
Yeah, it's probably very important that it's not a game where everybody separately wants to optimize their CO2 footprint, but where you have to look at the whole chain, which is really the most the best approach to it.
Yeah.
Talking about the best approach, so traditionally you still have a lot of broadcast viewers. So I was actually a bit even amazed about how high the ratio of broadcast to stream consumption still is. So it's a lot of streaming use for the ARD users or viewers, but it's still a vast amount of hours that is watched via broadcast TV. And actually broadcast, well, in a way it's pretty efficient. It's one signal for all, which is very powerful, but it's just this one, well, it's a couple of broadcast antennas, but still, do you by chance have any comparison how this compares the traditional broadcast to streaming?
No, but it's something we do want to look into. So then you're looking at user figures, and we have one company that we're doing broadcast analysis for us were able to tell us, based on HbbTV viewers, so they knew what type of screen they were looking at. Mm-hmm. So it was broadcast TV, but because you've got the start bar on HbbTV, so they had an idea of the screens that were being used. So they could do. I mean, it's still only modeling that we were doing, but they could do slightly more realistic modeling. Mm-hmm. But that's the next step. I think it would be quite interesting to look into.
And probably it's also interesting how many users. So there's probably a threshold of minimum users for the broadcast to be efficient, which might also be a huge topic. But it also made myself consider, why should I, again, this notion of, well, it's available, you can watch it anytime. So I take the stream. So and it's just for comfort, but I could also make it a habit to watch certain shows again when they are broadcast. So and could dig out my old DVB-T receiver again. So but I admit it's right now stored away, and I haven't used it for quite a while, but maybe I'll take it out again. Maybe, not sure yet. But
well, for live events, say for we had a conversation with my kids yesterday about football, because they were saying about, they'd had some debate in school whether you should stop the European Championships because of the environmental impact. And saying, well, what about the streaming impact of football? And wouldn't it be better if you use more broadcast than streaming? So, maybe we need to go back to everybody sitting around on the sofa watching the one TV screen.
Yeah, sharing a screen is probably watching more together, or even in the 60s when you were meeting at public places to watch TV, actually, and you were watching at the SD television, which was far away. But so back from the 60s to the present, and to Tuomo, who has a question.
Yeah, I kind of have to. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, so I kind of have two questions, because I mean, streaming has replaced, or what it basically has replaced is this DVD distribution. So I mean, is there any kind of idea like how does it compare to this DVD distribution? I mean, it's long gone now, but in some sense, I feel like I would really be happy to know like how much people would be driving somewhere to get to loan the DVD, take it home, watch it, drive back there, returning it, and then sort of when I was thinking about these old technologies that have died out, so I kind of went all the way maybe 50 years back to the time when in Finland we only had black and white TV, and I don't know, maybe that could be a thing to watch everything in black and white, and I think based on how the encoding is done, I think black and white would actually be probably way less data being transferred if it would be black and white. And I don't know, maybe it could be a thing for hipsters, I'm being very sustainable here, I'm only watching my TV on black and white, I don't know, that's just kind of a weird idea, but whatever it takes, maybe, and I mean black and white, I mean, it's cool, maybe that could be, even one option, go into black and white mode.
And silent.
yeah. With only text, but some of these, the the thing that streaming replaced was DVD distribution. Is there any because I think it probably was kind of, energy heavy thing as well. So I mean, naturally there is the need to take down the energy consumption no matter what, but it would be also fun to know if the thing it did replace was even more high in energy consumption.
I don't know of any studies, but it's an interesting one.
Yeah, maybe what one can say if you compare the analog TV, so which you are also referring to if you're talking about black and white themes, and the digital TV, then I would say the energy consumption was lowered by a factor of about 4 to 8, because what was a TV, one TV channel became one transponder which could hold 4 to 8 digital programs. But well, yeah, the question of how digital TV broadcast fares against streaming, that so I don't have any numbers, and you also already said, Annette, that you're not aware of a real comparison.
I haven't got any. I'm not saying there wasn't any, but I haven't got any.
Yeah. Wojtek?
Yeah, I would like to make it as a question, but I am almost sure that it's that field, because even it's one more thing which I remember from this 2 years ago, Berlinale Talents, which also was time when I had so many doubts about my field of creation, which is 360 video, not VR, which is interactive and in your hardware, but actual streaming of 360 3D video. And comparing to problems with green production and green streaming, which we consider this 2 years ago, where people were open for example, shooting again in 2K or some regulations or limitations of streaming, I said yes, but what we are really what we really need for streaming immersive 360 video is something around 8K, which is like killing all green propositions. And it was actually one of the reasons why I switched my mind for VR, which is kind of more green, because it's a one file to upload, maybe 2 gigabytes, but this is just one file, and you can start this on your computer or maybe sometimes on your VR headset. But putting this high, there are even 12K files, and 8K is definitely on YouTube. And streaming this to just check how beautiful is jungle or desert, it's so not green that it broke any other options which 360 video supposed to give, like making a lower carbon footprint, because you are not traveling to jungle, but millions of people will watch 8K streaming on YouTube of 360 8K video of this jungle. So in general, it was some kind of decision for me that no, I don't want to be part of this run for higher and higher resolutions, which unfortunately in my medium, in 360 video, it only makes sense. Like something which is even 4K streaming in 3D, it's so low resolution for viewer in VR headsets that people not enjoy it at all. So maybe I will finish with just a question. Do you still anyway are considering or interested in producing or streaming 360 content in high resolution, obviously, as a RBB?
No, that's an interesting question. We haven't done anything in 360 for a long time, because it's very difficult, or it's very expensive to produce, and then you need the players to do it, and it's still kind of niche for us, at least. So No, I think we're just kind of having budgets cut and struggling just to do flat videos.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Are there any more questions? We can call it a day, or Annette, if you want to add anything from your side, I will also have some few words for the closing, but.
No, thanks for letting me present the project. And if you've any questions, don't hesitate to get in contact.
Thanks a lot for your presentation. And I thought it was really a good insight into a part of, well, the media production chain or the media value chain that we often overlook at as well, content producers. And you also showed that even as an end user, we have a certain responsibility, both as a producer and as an end user, to minimize the carbon footprint of, well, this chain. So we are, well, pretty much at the beginning, but also at the end. And there's still a lot of, well, levers where we could tweak this chain to become more sustainable without really losing much of the experience that we value, because, well, the most effective measure from our side as producers would be to produce bad content, so nobody watches it. But I think you can't. that would need a concerted action to deter people from TV once and for all, and that is something that we definitely do not want. Serious again. So next time we have Lena Giesecke who's professor for creative technologies at Film University Babelsberg, and she's researching on the impact of the carbon and environmental impact of the post-production, film post-production, and anything that's related to cloud computing in the production and post-production process. If you have ticked the box in the Eventbrite link invitation or registration that you'd like to receive more notes or notifications from us, then you should get a note on the next event. Otherwise, you maybe those who received the PDF invitation, there were all 3 links. And so we hope to see you again. Please also spread the word. It's really open, not only to the participating universities, so you can give it to friends, relatives, and even to people you don't like if you think they should know about this. So it was good seeing you here. Good to have you here, Annette. Hope the project will go along well, and maybe we can meet in a year or so to see what insights you got during your research. Would be a pleasure. So I wish you a nice afternoon and a calm evening.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
I was nearly about to say good night and good luck, like in this George Clooney film, but I then refrained from doing it. Okay.
See you soon.
Yeah, see you
Bye.
soon.